and things like that, and Yale University. And
context of especially Bardi, but some of the other languages, I think you mentioned 3 languages. What is the situation? So you were talking about like language learning materials in the 90s. Are those people now, do they have children as well who are learning Bardi? What is it like?
Yeah, so each of the 3 Aboriginal communities I've worked with in Australia have very different language histories and language contexts these days. So for Bardi, there are still people with first language knowledge of Bardi and other emerging elders and emerging language learners. I am friends with the grandkids and the great-grandkids of the elders I started working with in the early 90s. Those elders, their parents and grandparents worked with linguists in the 70s, 60s, 50s, and 1930s as well. So there's quite a long tradition of Bardi language work in somewhat different ways for different purposes. But yeah, so Bardi people have been working with linguists for over 100 years at this point. And as so I'd say the generation of elders that I started working with in the late 90s and who started the language program in the early 90s were really the last generation to be more comfortable in Bardi than in English. But that said, there is still a lot of Bardi knowledge in the community and a lot of interest in learning more Bardi amongst people my age, and people younger, some elders as well. And so what we've been focusing on now has been more ways of bringing Bardi back into everyday life, ways of using phrases in conversation, ways of making the stories and the language information more accessible. The writing system for Bardi is relatively straightforward, but it's very different from English. And so for people who've grown up reading English and for then switching to Bardi, that's quite a hurdle. So we've been working on ways to make that easier to do, just so all of the stuff we have for Bardi is not locked up in this writing system that's not readable. Mm-hmm. For Yandhangu is spoken in a region that has a large number of Aboriginal languages and languages that are still being learned and passed on as first or second languages. English is it's a second or third or fourth language in communities which are pretty highly monolingual. English is used to some extent. Creole is also used. So there are, and Aboriginal English as well. Actually, that's true at one point as well. There are Aboriginal Englishes and Creoles that are also used in this context too. But Yandhangu has been losing out to other related Aboriginal languages rather than to English, I'd say. And so those materials, I'd say, are a record, and I think they are used in community programs and so on, but I haven't really kept contact with people at Milingimbi community for some years now, so I'm not really sure what how that work is being used, and would be happy to help with that if appropriate. But it's a different sort of. I felt like I was kind of more of a language contractor in Milingimbi than, say, with the Bardi community, where we had a much longer negotiation of roles, and where at this point I have a 23-year history with the community and friends and so on there. So it's a different sort of working relationship there. For Galilee, the language situation is more of language reclamation and language awakening. The Galilee community was forcibly removed from traditional country in the late 1920s, and they were moved to a number of different Aboriginal reservations and communities and missions in far eastern Queensland. And so this was a government removal to different areas, hundreds and hundreds of kilometres away. And so the current Galilee community, it's their parents and grandparents who grew up knowing something about the language, but mostly hearing English or Aboriginal English or Murri talk in different communities. There are some Galilee elders who know something of the language, but for the most part, this is a situation where we're reawakening the language and reintroducing language materials after a hiatus of, I guess, 70, 80 years for the most part. And this has also been a gathering together point for Galilee people as well. So having, particularly the work that Toby's done through the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, through the Galilee Ngulkana website, that has been a point of contact for Galilee people who are reclaiming their heritage and finding family connections that they didn't know about. And so language there has been very much about creating community ties and bringing people together. And I feel very honored to be a part of that, even though I'm very far away. It's been wonderful to see that happen, and the work that Toby and the Galilee Culture Committee have been doing.
Yeah, I'm so inspired by how you continue to have a close relationship, even though physically you're so far from the people that you work with. That I think that's really, really nice. Well, thank you, Claire, so much for making time for Field Notes. Where can people find you if they want to read